Okay, deep breath. The political roller coaster is just starting to grind its wheels. The ANC's National Executive Committee meets in Durban this weekend to finalise its list of nominees for public representatives ahead of the election a little later this year. The candidates have been nominated, as you know, by ANC branches across the country. The people whose names appear on the list are party members who may serve in Parliament and government. All of that is overhung by the January 8 statement, which takes place in a couple of days' time. Let's try and pull all of this together. Political commentator and presenter of our program, The Fix, on Sunday mornings, Karima Brown. A very happy new year to you. First of all, let's just talk about the list itself.
Yes.
How important is this? And the process itself, by all accounts, is not going as smoothly as we perhaps would like it.
Obviously, we know, Jeremy, the governing party is deeply divided. President Cyril Ramaphosa does have the upper hand, but it's a very narrow upper hand that he has. And of course, the list processes have been open to branches. And the problem with the ANC at the moment is that there are a lot of contestation about which branches are actually in good standing. So we have a national list conference, which was postponed, by the way. The fact that they're meeting on January 4th in a special NEC meeting is a date that had to be deferred to as a consequence of all these problems. So you can understand why this is so important. And the reason for this is that there are so many people who are on these lists that can't actually be on the list in terms of ANC criteria, which was adopted at the 54th National Conference. And that is the critical issue. The NEC that sits in January the 4th has the final say. They're the final arbiters, but they have to apply the criteria that they've adopted. And many of the people on the lists that we've had a look at, there are no official ones that are being released, simply do not qualify to be on this list in terms of the ANC's own criteria, which is the eye of the needle, and of course the fact that people shouldn't be involved in criminal activity, alleged criminal activity, have served time in prison, post 1996. And so this is going to be a very difficult, fraught process for the organisation.
So how does the party then apply its mind to this and the rotten apples that you talk about? How are they, first of all, weeded out, to mix the metaphors, but then how would they deal with that contestation which inevitably will arise?
Look, there's an overall framework for me that I think faces the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa. Obviously, he needs an organization to run an election machinery, and for that he needs maximum unity. But if that unity is a unity that is a fake unity, which is built on the fact that people paper over the fundamental cracks in the party, then the risk he runs is that he alienates South Africans at large, for example, because there is a lot of support for the president, but there is not a lot of support for those in the ANC who have, for example, such as Jacob Zuma, Mosibenzi Zwane, the 10 people, for example, that Cyril Ramaphosa cut from his cabinet when he became the president of the country. There's not a lot of support for them because of the state capture project and the absolute looting that cost the country close to R1 trillion. So Cyril Ramaphosa has to walk this tight line. He has to have an election machine that goes into the field, that gets maximum votes, because that is going to give him the freedom to do what he needs to do. But he also needs to balance that list in such a way that the ANC is able to close the gap, the credibility gap between itself and its constituency.
How much say does he really have over the process?
He personally doesn't have say. In terms of the criteria of the ANC, what it says is that the National List Committee Conference may remove names, for example, of a candidate if compelling reasons are presented. For example, the list committee was not aware that the integrity committee or a DC had been ruled against the conduct of a comrade, or that a comrade is under investigation for a serious crime. And of course, that name's removal requires 80% support of the NEC. Now, in a contested NEC like that, you can see, Jeremy, how tough that is going to be. However, the African National Congress has to think beyond its own internal party dynamics. It needs to appeal to the broadest amount of South Africans. And the broadest amount of South Africans in 2016 rejected it in 3 major municipalities.
But often insularity has been a hallmark of the ANC. Is there any sense that you're getting from your sources within the party that that dynamic that you refer to is actually going to change?
Yes, I think there is, but it's a contested space again, because the Jacob Zuma faction and people implicated in state capture, either via the Commission of Inquiry in the Nugent Commission that looked at SARS, the Parliamentary Commission that looked into ESCOM, the ad hoc committee that looked into the SABC, and then, of course, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into state capture, and the various criminal investigations that are underway against a series of individuals, is going to be very high up on the minds of those who are serious about winning power in 2019, because those are the concerns.
If you refer to that gang of 10, for instance,
yes,
have they been completely neutralized, or is there still a last throw at the dice as far as that?
No, they haven't been completely neutralized. They have been severely circumvented in terms of their processes. So you would, for example, know that SARS is no longer in the hands of Tom Moyane. He has been fired. Despite several attempts to try and delay the process, question the process, he's effectively not the head of SARS anymore. And that was one of the most critical institutions that was captured under the state capture project. President Jacob Zuma is no longer the state president. Remember, his mandate only had to come to an end when we go to an election. He's been removed from the process. But if you look at the list nomination process, now I'm sitting here with a list that is not recognized as a formal list, but it's a list that comes from ANC sources. On it, you have the following names. You have Malusi Gigaba, the inquiry in Parliament has recommended that he be investigated. He's also found to have lied to a court, for example. So in terms of the criteria, he shouldn't even have been nominated. So that's the kind of problem you look at. You look at Jacob Zuma is on the list. This is the national to national list. You look at Mosebenzi Zwane, the man who essentially enabled the Guptas to take Tegeta from one of the major mining companies. You have someone like Pule Mabe, who has sexual misconduct charges against him on the list. So this is going to be a very, very difficult nut to crack. But what the African National Congress is going to have to understand is that South Africans will not tolerate these individuals on a promise of a reform ticket.
These individuals inevitably are going to fight back, and one's got to assume that a degree of lobbying is already happening. They're all well-known names with a modicum of support within the organisation.
Yes, absolutely. What we've seen, Jeremy, which is, I think, one of the most interesting dynamics that has come out of our politics since 1994, is the establishment of very populist organizations. We know, for example, someone like Claudia Motsoeneng launched a party in the Free State. We know that there are people that have launched a party in the Northwest and, of course, in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, those were provinces referred to last year when you and I were at NASDAQ as the so-called Premier League provinces.
Yes.
What you see here is an attempt to have a political presence of people that were close and part of the state capture project in case the candidates don't make it on the lists here and the ANC does really badly, say, for example, drop below 50%, and some of these parties are then able to get in, because what they will then be able to do is be back in the state, and because you would have coalition governments, you would have them, even if they have small numbers, be really strategic to be able to have, provincial governments cohere, for example, like in a place like Gauteng. Many people wonder and worry if the ANC can take this province. And so provinces here that are rich in resources, that have large budgets, are going to be the places where these smaller parties are going to try and get back into the game. Because remember, the taps have been turned off, the largesse has come to an end, people have been fired, others have been removed, suspended, but they're wanting to find a way back in, and the list process is one of the ways in which they do that.
Let's park the list process if we can for the moment. Let me refer you to a statement from the ANC's head of elections, Fikile Mbalula, who says the January 8th statement, just a couple of days away, as I said, would be, and I quote, be used to launch the manifesto, which would contain all the commitments and tangible delivery programs that the ANC would deliver over the next 5 years, on top of the progress the party has made since the dawn of democracy in 1994. Lots of political rhetoric there. This year, Karima, how important then in an election year is that Jan 8 statement? What are we looking out for?
What we're looking out for is a clear program of action that is credible, implementable, and most of all, that connects with the ANC's base, because that has been the difficulty. The chasm between the ANC and its traditional base has grown. And so what the ANC needs to do, it needs to convince its base that it has the best, most implementable, most practical way of dealing with the current crisis that we face in the economy, that we face with joblessness, and that we face with inequality. They need to be believable. They need to be credible, and they need to close the gap.
What does that mean, believable and credible? What would define then a deliverable platform that is going to bring its voter base into the tent again, many of those who are dissatisfied and disillusioned?
So, for example, if the African National Congress commits itself to an anti-corruption campaign, there is no possible way that Jacob Zuma's name, for example,
is a complete contradiction.
It's a complete contradiction. You cannot have someone like Mosibenzi Zwane on that list. So those are the tough questions that will have to be answered in that list conference that precedes the January 8th statement. And remember, the January 8th statement is a collective statement of the NEC as a whole. It's not the president's individual remarks to the country as he would do, let's say, in Sona, for example. This is an expression of the party. So that dilemma, that contradiction that he has, which is maximum unity in the ANC, but not at the cost of the South African people and the believability of the message.
So is it your sense then, Karima, that the party can do that? And Balula goes on to say, we will use the occasion to, again, I quote, restore hope, unity you've just mentioned, and renewal as per the injunctions of the 54th National Congress at Nasrec. Does it have it within itself to actually achieve what you've just outlined?
Look, the African National Congress is very adroit at working under siege, but it has a massive credibility gap. We had thousands of people walk the streets in 2017, for example, calling for the resignation of President Jacob Zuma. You had ANC MPs that were prepared to risk their careers and voted with the opposition for his removal. You had 3 attempts inside the organization to have him removed. And of course, President Ramaphosa has moved very swiftly with looking at state-owned companies. And of course, also we've got a new National Prosecuting Authority head, Shamila Batoy. So there's a lot that has been done that can now actually just fall into place that will give the ANC the breathing space to do that. However, if the African National Congress has an approach to unity that says it doesn't really matter who's on the list as long as they're popular in the ANC, then we're going to go with it, then they run the risk of alienating the majority of South Africans, because people are tired of the non-delivery. They are tired of the fact that monies have been stolen. We have a new VAT regime as a consequence of that hole in the public fiscus. So President Ramaphosa has to do a very delicate egg dance. He's going to compromise, and he's going to have to negotiate his way. But the most important thing is he will have to put the interests of South Africa above the interests of the African National Congress.
And one senses many eggs in that process, Karima, are probably going to be broken along the way. We'll talk to you again. Karima Brown, political commentator, also host of our Sunday morning political talk show, The Fix. Now,